Hey, this is Ike. I'm making my second video for Pokersavvyplus.com. Today I'm going to be playing 4 tables of 6 max 2-4 no limit. My last video was 9-handed 1-2, so this is going to be a pretty different game. Well, we had an interesting hand right off the bat there. The Queen-9 suited in the big blind against the cutoff open and button call. If the button had had a slightly bigger stack, I would have been more inclined to play my hand for either a re-raise or a call. Queen-9 suited is a hand you can sort of do both there. It's very marginal for a call, which also makes it a good hand to consider re-raise semi-bluffing with. But with the shorter stack there on the button, if I re-raise, I'm just going to get it all in pre-flop against the button a huge percentage of the time that the first guy folds, and Queen-9 suited is just not strong enough to do that, even though this guy is a really loose, ridiculous player. I have a bunch of stats on my opponents in these games, even though I don't play much 2-4 myself. I'm playing on the computer of a friend who has put in a bunch of hands in these games, and so I've got numbers on a lot of people. So that'll be good, because I definitely take people's stats into account to a large extent in my own play, and that's something that might not come across necessarily in the videos I do, since I'm usually playing in games that I wouldn't play in on my own. King-Queen against a lot of players I would call, but against an unknown I fold. Aces, this is a clear re-raise. I'd never call here, and I think re-raising just 4 times the open is totally fine. A lot of players re-raise bigger there, and I used to make it more like 5x there when there was an open and a cold call. But lately I've been making it only 4, and I think it's actually pretty good, because the second player generally doesn't have a very strong hand there, and he's not going to call, even though he's getting offered a pretty good price. And then there's this interesting sort of pressure put on the first player, because there's the second player behind him, and if he flat calls that small re-raise, the other player is going to come in behind him, and he's going to be stuck between me, with probably a strong hand, and the other player with a wide range that can hit any flop pretty hard some of the time. So even though it's a small raise, it tends to put people in bad spots, and generally, if you can raise small and get away with it, it's better, because it lets you bluff cheaper. So King-9 off on the button, standard open for me. Ace-9 suited from the small blind is a hand I really like re-raising with, because it's just barely not good enough to call, but I'm happy to re-raise with it and try and take the pot down pre-flop. I can flop pretty good post-flop. That's kind of weird. I have a lot of equity against a lot of the hands he could have here, but I don't think I'm ever actually ahead, and I can't call. This is a pretty marginal hand in this spot, I think, but with a short stack in the small blind, and seemingly a pretty active one, I think I'm going to let it go. 10-7 off on the button, I open every time. Open this every time, by a lot. Open that from under the gun every time. This guy's real loose and aggressive, but re-raising kinda sucks, and calling kinda sucks, so I'm just gonna let it go. If I had King-Jack suited or King-Queen off, I probably would have flat called. And I'm getting 3-bet a whole lot here. As is now becoming pretty obvious, there's a lot more 3-betting in 6-max games than full ring in general. And that has to do with two things. First of all, it's just correct to be 3-betting a lot more in 6-max games than in full ring games, because everything happens in later position relative to the blinds. Everybody has weaker hands on average. I'm going to re-raise and stack off with king-queen here. I think it's just good enough against this guy's open. If I call, I'm likely to get squeezed. And I got this cold caller here. That's kind of ugly. Okay, I'm going to re-raise ace-king over here. And I'm pretty sure I have to fold to that. That cold call represents a lot of strength. So, as I was saying, there are two reasons that there's a lot more re-raising in 6-max games. The first is that it's correct to do so, and the second is that because it's correct to do so, people who like re-raising play 6-max games. And in general, people who like playing aggressively play 6-max games. If you compare the stats of these tables to the people I was playing against in the full ring games in my last video, they're much, much more aggressive. And granted, some of that comes from the fact that it's a more short-handed game, and so, of course, you should be playing more pots. But a lot of that comes from the fact that people who like to play a lot of pots play 6-max. And also play a lot more big pots in a 6-max game, and people who like to play big pots play a lot more 6-max. There's going to be a lot more bluffing post-flop, there are going to be a lot more thin call-downs, there's going to be a lot more thin value betting. The games are just generally going to play a lot bigger and a lot faster. I like checking behind with that 10-7 there because definitely got some showdown value, but I don't want to get raised. And I'm going to put in a little value bet and protect my hand there. I think I'm usually good after he checks twice. And I'm just going to check it behind on that card. I might have just lost to a straight draw or a flush draw. Just play a little pot control here. I might be good. I also have a good shot at improving. That's not a good river. If he bets here, I can't see how I can call. If he checks, I'm pretty sure I just want to check it behind. Turning my hand into a bluff here is a consideration. But, yeah, I really want to just check it behind and hope he's something like ace-jack with no spade. I'm pretty sure I'm not getting him off that. For what it's worth, I don't think his flop call there is very good at all. I'm going to blow him off that hand a very large percentage of the time. I'm going to raise this guy's limp. He plays a lot of hands, and he seems to raise about the better half of them. So I'm happy to get ace-4 suited in against him. And not only am I happy to get ace-4 suited in against him, but I'd prefer to do that, or take it down pre-flop, than to limp and see a flop there. And I'm just going to make a little raise here. Something that most players don't pay enough attention to is making the smallest raise they can get away with against short stacks. That way, you isolate the guy, you get yourself all in against him, and you commit the minimum amount of money necessary to the pot in case somebody happens to come over you for a 4-bet and force you to fold. Though in that case, I'm probably not getting away from queens. It's important that I make the same size re-raise with all of my hands. And if I have 8s or 9s there and somebody comes over me, I am going to get away from it. Now, this is sort of a mess. I've re-raised ace-king. There's about twice the pot left to play. Flop came pretty bad, and I'm just going to check fold it. He instantly checked it back. I think it's likely he had the check fold button clicked. I'm just going to bet 60 and try to take it down. And he instantly called. That's also odd. With twice what's left to play in the pot, I'm getting a pretty good price to bluff at it, so I'm just sticking it in here. Alright, and I got called by a pair of 8s. He may have tricked me with his timing tells there. He may just really like playing fast. I don't know. That hand went rather poorly for me, though. 7s are a fold here against the under-the-gun raise. I'd probably call 9s. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what was going on in that 8-5 hand. Seems like a pretty bad call down. I like this as a spot to semi-bluff 3-bet here. I think King-Jack is just not quite good enough to call against his cutoff open, which makes it exactly the sort of hand I want to re-raise. You may have heard me talking about that before in my last video, and that's something people talk about a lot in general, actually, the idea of re-raising with the best hands that you can't call with. And it's actually a concept that really applies on every street, not just pre-flop. There are spots on the flop where you can't quite call with a gut shot, and gut shots make your best bluffing hands, and so forth. The basic idea is that you want to play as many hands as possible, as profitably as possible, so it's a bit of a waste to turn a hand that can profitably call into a bluff by raising it and putting yourself in a situation where you never get the money in ahead. And so if you've ruled out raising with the medium hands that can profitably call, then clearly the best hands to be semi-bluffing with are the best hands that don't qualify for that category. And then, of course, you'll also be re-raising for value with your very best hands. Or sometimes will be. And I actually like overbetting all in with the ace-queen here. It's pretty much a bluff, but once again, it's actually a very similar concept to what I was just talking about. One of the best hands I can't profitably call. Perfect hand to semi-bluff all in. I think this guy's re-raising a pretty wide range there. I think I stand to take it down a majority of the time pre-flop. Normally I open to 4x against the big blind from the small blind, but when somebody has less than 30 big blinds on the table, I dial it back to 3x, because their positional advantage is lower, and it's not as necessary to raise large to discourage action. In addition to ace-queen, other hands that would be good for that 4-bet all-in bluff are particularly suited ace-x. You're basically just looking for hands that tend to do pretty well against a range of biggish pairs and ace-king. And the ace blocker is not irrelevant. The fact that I have an ace in my hand makes it substantially less likely that one of my opponents has aces or ace-king, and that makes it substantially less likely I get called. And you'll notice that I'm being pretty meticulous about reloading every time I can. It's a small thing, but if you're playing poker for a living, small things add up over the hundreds of thousands of hands you play in a year, and it's important to have as many chips on the table as you can when you're in position. So I try to reload as I get to my button, or rather, anytime I'm not in the blinds and fall below maximum buy-in, I try to reload right away. However, I think that, and most people would agree with me on this point, I think that it's a disadvantage to have more chips on the table when you're in the blinds. You stand to lose money from the blinds, and you stand to lose more money the deeper the stacks are. So, generally, if I fall below the maximum buy-in, and I'm about to be the big blind, or about to be the small blind, I will wait until I'm the button to reload. I'm going to quit this game if it drops below three-handed. I'll play three-handed. And this is supposed to be a 6-max video, not a three-handed video. Let me find some other tables. And I'm not taking it too seriously right now because I'm more interested in making an interesting video than making as much money as I can this half hour or so. But game selection is really important, and I would probably be quitting a lot of these games if I were really playing to maximize my EV rather than to make a good video, because there are not really any big fish at these tables I'm sitting at. There was that guy who had about a 60% voluntarily put into the pot on the one table, but he's gone now. And yeah, these games could really be a lot better. You might have seen me debating about which seat to take at that table for a minute, and opting for this one. I'm a little closer to being in position against Nebby here, who's the only one of the players at the table I don't have stats on, and thus more likely than any of the others to be a fish. And so I think that I'd rather be in this position where Nebby, the potential fish, is on the button for my big blind than the other one where he's on my immediate left and I rarely get to play a pot against him in position and really don't get to play many pots with him at all. And in fact, when I'm raising, I'm pushing him out of the pot. So, along with game selection, very similar and sometimes overlapping concept is seat selection. Sometimes, in the bigger stakes games I'm playing, where there aren't that many games to choose from, there'll be a table where there's one seat available, and there's a big fish in the game, but that seat gives me bad access to hands against the fish, and I'm just going to mostly be playing pots against 4 other really good players, and that game will be much less appealing for that reason. Generally, seats I like to have relative to a full stacked fish. If he's passive, I like to either be on the button when he's the big blind, in the big blind when he's the button, or immediately on his left. Those are the best seats relative to a fish. Having a good short stacker on your immediate left is almost always bad news because it forces you to tighten up a lot. It's a little on the loose side, but I think Jack 7 or Jack 5 suited here stands to show a profit as a blind steal. I've been opening up my blind steals a little bit recently. A couple weeks ago, I think I wouldn't have raised that hand. And what's been persuading me to do that is just looking at some poker tracker stats, looking at my success when attempting to steal the blinds. that king 5 hand, there's really nothing I can do there. I mean, I can check call one street, but then I'm just going to be guessing on the next two, and either I'm going to have to call down multiple barrels, and that's not going to go well, or else I'm going to check fold, and I'm rarely going to get to showdown ahead. Getting yourself in spots where you're guessing like that is almost always a bad thing. It lets your opponents outplay you. What I mean by spots where you're guessing are spots where you have a hand that only beats a bluff, your opponent knows you're very likely to have a hand that only beats a bluff, and then they get to bet a range of value bets and bluffs that makes it very hard for you to make good decisions. Okay, this is a kind of tricky spot with the 5s. I'm not sure what I want to do. I think I just want to lead about 16 and stack off. I'm going to be behind. Now, never mind, I just saw that guy's stats. That's not what I want to do at all. I want to check fold. Against a looser player, generally cold calling with that short a stack is indicative of a weak player. And this guy may very well be weak, but he's not loose, so that's a clear check fold. That guy would need to be about twice as loose as he is for me to want to stack off there. I made the mistake of assuming he was looser than he was because he made the generally inferior play of cold calling with so little left to play. This is a great spot for me to lead out because I cold call 8s, 9s, and 10s, as well as hands like Queen Jack suited in this spot, so I have a gut shot, but I can represent a very strong range, and I'm likely to blow him off overcards. I might get one call, in which case I would probably fire again, and I think I can even blow him off over pairs. But against a raise, I gotta let it go. And yeah, he flopped top 2, so. That guy's pretty tight. I think I'm just going to let the 10-8 suited go. Against a looser player, both cold calling and re-raising are decent options. Here I'm going to make a small raise on the button there since we've got two relatively short stacks in the blinds. I think you can get away with a smaller raise there. Of course, I'm not making the small raise because I have 5-4. I'm making the small raise because there are two short stacks in the blinds. I have to make the same raise with my stronger hands too, or I will be opening myself up being exploited. This is kind of ugly. I think I probably just want to bet big and call a shove here. I could just overbet all in. That's not a horrible idea. Yeah, I might get bluff shoved on with two overcards here and have to call, and that's a mess. I think just overbet shoving the hand is the right way to play it. This is sort of transparent that I have a big draw when I do that, but most people aren't going to sack up and call king high there, even if they are 95% certain I have a straight draw. They're not even in great shape if they do, but it's preferable for me to take the pot down there rather than get it in against king high, and I think that's the main difference that the overbet shove has against a normal bet size there, is that I'm much less likely to accidentally get it in against two overcards that happen to be in good shape and think they're bluffing. just going to fold here. Bad board to mess around with 5s on. A lot of people like to call in spots like this. I think they're making a big mistake. People really tend to overestimate their implied odds with pocket pairs. If this guy's re-raising any sort of reasonable range, as opposed to like jacks plus and ace king, you're simply not going to stack him most of the time you flop a set. Which is a large part of why it's important to be re-raising a wide range there, so that you do have hands that you're planning on folding post-flop. And so that your opponents cannot profitably call with small pocket pairs, just trying to stack you. I mean, of course, you could re-raise a really tight range and try and get away from your overpairs sometimes, but that's just not what you want to be doing. You want to be able to stack off when you make an overpair in a re-raised pot without worrying about it, and the way you let that be the case is by having bluffs and semi-bluffs enough of the time that your opponents have to be stacking off with top pair against you in re-raised pots. 8-7 off is probably toward the lower end of the range that I'd be raising against somebody with those sorts of stats. That's not a particularly loose or particularly tight player. Pretty average for 6 max. Queen 10 off here is pretty marginal. The players left to act behind me are tight, so I'm going to go ahead and raise it. With looser players behind me, I would let it go. Again, re-raising, or open raising small from late position against a short stack. I saved $2 there. Doesn't seem important, but the little stuff matters, and most people underestimate the extent to which the little stuff matters, especially against short stacks. And I hate playing against short stacks, so I'm delighted to do anything I can to get you to play better against them, and them to make less money. So this guy on my left over here, binary finary, is pretty nitty, so I would have been opening that queen 4 suited if it was folded to me in the small blind. I would not be opening that against the vast majority of opponents. I would be folding it. But against him, I think any 2 cards are going to show a profit against a guy with those stats, unless he catches on that I'm raising any 2. So I'll probably be opening somewhere in the neighborhood of 70-75% of my hands against a player that tight when it's folded to me in the small blind. Flopped a gut shot here. Good board to c-bet on. He's likely to have 2 overcards, and most people are not going to mess around when they flop 2 overcards there. Which, by the way, I think is a mistake. I think a hand like Queen 10 does have enough value that he should be leading out or check raising with it a very large percentage of the time, but most players just don't. As I was talking about earlier, game selection, it's not particularly glamorous, but it's a huge part of how much money you're going to make playing poker, is how good the games you play in are. And this game up here on the top right is absolutely terrible. If I had to guess, I would say that the short stack is the guy in this game who's earning the most money right now. All these players are perfectly competent. They're all pretty tight. They're pretty much just passing the blinds around, and the short stack's natural advantage of having less chips on the table probably makes him the most profitable player in this game. But I'm going to stay in it because a game with 4 other good full stack regulars and one good short stack is likely to present a lot of interesting situations. So I'm not going to quit it, but if I was playing at my normal stakes against 5 good regulars in my games, I would be quitting right now. That lead is very often weak in my experience. I'm going to make it about 85, and I'm going to flat call the ace-queen here. I think that hand can go either way, but that flat calling is probably the safer play against a relatively unknown opponent. And I'm just going to check call here. I think my ace high is pretty good. And I'm inclined to call the second barrel here too, and then decide on the river. This is an ugly spot. A lot of hands picked up draws on the turn that would incline him to semi-bluff there, and now none of them really got there on the river, with the exception of 5-6. So I have to really seriously think about calling the third barrel with ace-queen high here. Another thing to think about in this spot is how many hands he would be value betting with, and I really think he needs an overpair to be value betting here. So if he needs an overpair to be value betting and is likely to have fired 3 barrels with all sorts of hands that picked up straight draws or gut shots or flush draws on the turn, it's quite likely that my hand is going to be good here. I'm getting better than 2-1, and I think it's a call. So I might look kind of dumb here, but I think this is a good call. Well, that's certainly going to happen sometimes. The results of that hand don't tell me much about how to feel about my decision there. If he had shown up with something like a pair of 7s or a pair of 8s, not a pocket pair for a set, but something like ace-7 or ace-8, then I would have to be worried that I had made a mistake. But, yeah, I'm just going to lose trips sometimes there, and that's fine. And you may have noticed a couple hands ago I raised to 12 rather than to 16, small to big. I did that because I had gotten short stacked, and as I was talking about before, when I'm playing against a short stack, small blind to big blind, I raise smaller. Same thing applies if, for one hand, I happen to be short stacked in the small blind. And even more so since this guy is so tight that I'm just going to take it down pre-flop a huge percentage of the time, and usually will have no desire to put more money in the pot if I fail to. And I think ace-jack is just barely good enough to call here. I think that's a good board to lead out on. About 20. It's a good board to lead out on because I also flop a lot of gut shots and open-enders on that board, king jack, jack 10, king 10. And also I flop 2 pairs in sets, so I'm going to be leading out all those hands. and can mix in a more medium strength hand from time to time too, because it's hard for him to raise there. And I'm going to re-raise this guy this time. It may seem kind of odd that I flat called ace-queen, now I'm 3-betting with king-7 suited, but generally, as I've been saying over and over, I like to flat call with my medium strength hands and 3-bet with my very strongest hands, along with the hands I think that are just a bit too weak to play for a call. King-9 suited, I'd certainly be willing to play for a call there. King-8 suited and King-7 suited are very marginal hands that probably can't quite call, and thus make good 3-betting hands. And now I'm going to do something kind of tricky and underbet here. It's a really dry board. I might get floated, in which case I plan on betting small again on the turn. This is also a good line to be taking with basically ace-10 or better here. That is ace-10 or an overpair. You can lay him such a good price because he's very unlikely to ever have a hand that is behind, but with a lot of ways to improve. So you can make somebody make 3 hard decisions there by making small bets on the flop, turn, and river. I mostly re-raise here, but he's really tight, and I think flat calling is just fine. And I'm going to go for a check raise on this board. It's a dry flop. People check raise bluff these boards a lot. I would be check raise bluffing on this board a decent amount. And here I'm going to be check raising for value with a stronger hand than he expects me to have. I don't see how he can get away from king-queen on this board. I'm representing set of 6s or set of 2s, except that I wouldn't actually call those hands against him, but I doubt he thinks I wouldn't. Or a slow-played pocket kings, pocket aces, or ace-king. You have to keep in mind these guys have not watched me play for hours and hours. They don't have hundreds of hands against me. They have a small sample, and in that sample I've been pretty loose and pretty aggressive, and he probably doesn't think I'm slow playing much there pre-flop. I'm going to check behind with this jack-6 here, because it's great news if a 4 comes off and he has an ace. I don't want to get blown out of this pot. And just in general, when the board comes low like that, and he's called from the blinds, and I'm just going to fold to that bet. His range is way, way ahead of my range there, because he has lots of pairs, 6s through 9s, and stuff like that. And any ace has a gut shot, and thinks it has 2 overs to any pair I might have. So I expect to get played back very aggressively on that board. Especially by a player like Papa Fox, who has pretty reasonable pre-flop numbers, but on the looser side, and medium post-flop aggression factor. My inclination is to think that this guy plays pretty well, and is going to have a strong, narrow range when he cold calls my button open from the small blind, since he raises 25% of hands and calls an additional 2%. It's going to be strongly weighted towards hands like ace-jack, queen-jack suited, and pairs 7s through 10s or so. And I'm going to go ahead and call it a session after about one more orbit. I hope this has been instructive. If you compare this to my last video in the 1-2 ring game, it's pretty easy to see how drastically different 6-max and full ring play, and hopefully I've shown a few of the ways that you should adjust your game to account for that. As always, please post on the forums, let me know what you liked, what you didn't like. If there are any hands you want to hear more analysis about, I'd be happy to get into it. With the exception of that embarrassing ace-queen call down, it's been fun making the video. Not that I think that was a mistake, but it always looks bad to call 3 barrels with ace high and lose. That's not exactly the river I wanted to see, I don't think. I was planning on 3-barreling a blank. I think I'm going to go ahead and 3-barrel that one, too. I think he's going to fold a lot of 1-pair hands here. Or rather, 2-pair hands even. He's certainly going to fold a lot of 1-pair hands. I think if he has less than aces up, he gets away from it there, yeah. He may even get away from aces up. People hate calling down on a 4-straight board and losing to the straight. When I bet that flop there, I had pretty much decided I was 3-barreling almost any combination of turn and river cards. The flop bet in a vacuum does not stand to show a profit, but a 3-barrel on a board like that I think does. It's a common mistake a lot of opponents make to check call that board exclusively with a range of 1-pair hands that are going to have a very hard time getting to showdown against a 3-barrel, and that's a mistake I like to jump on. Almost nobody ever check calls a set of kings on that board or whatever, so if nothing comes to improve the board, you nearly always blow them off it with a 3-barrel. And as it turned out, the ace is a pretty good card for me, because I don't think they check call that flop with ace-king or ace-queen very much either. The jack is a tricky card, but not enough to talk me out of firing 3 barrels after I've bet the flop and turn. Obviously, if he has a 10, I'm getting snap called by the nuts, but I think I get him off of most 2 pairs there, and all 1 pairs. Anyway, it's been a fun little session. Hope you enjoyed it and learned some stuff. And good luck in all your games.